Hey. This meeting have a waiting room?
Waiting room?
Yeah, I just saw that. It said Scarbat was in the waiting room. There we go.
My apologies for running slightly late and having Zoom issues.
Yeah, I was saying to, I was just saying to Ahmad, like, you came into the waiting room. Does this meeting have a waiting room? Everyone else seems to just join. It's like a special entrance for you.
I think the title of the Zoom meeting is also incorrect. It states APAC, even though this is the EMEA meeting. So hopefully that's just a error in the title.
The Zoom recording link was the same, but actually we can update that because I have just removed the APAC invite completely. So yeah, you should. Well, maybe you probably can't, but yeah, we should update that.
It says EMEA for me.
No, so on the Zoom one's different. They used to be shared, and it was just APAC was after. So we usually edited the EMEA invite and then edited the APAC invite. So yeah, but they had a shared Zoom link.
Anyways, shall we get started? Okay, so I think I've caught up from last week's conversations, and I've had a few one-on-ones with Amy and Michele since. So I think what we should do today is kind of concentrate our conversation on what goals that we need to achieve that are specific towards self-service deployments in coordination with what we need to accomplish with the team orchestration. So linked in the discussion is one issue and one epic. And I kind of want to concentrate on the epic because I feel like this is the one where I've put a lot of effort into trying to define what our goals ought to be. Trying to define the problem statement appropriately and what I think that we need to concentrate on what to work on. So I guess a little bit of prefix to this before we start discussing things. And Amy, correct me where I may be incorrect or where we need some clarification on this. But from my perspective, it sounds like team orchestration is going to be the responsible party for determining what a pipeline is ultimately going to look like and what kind of mechanism or system that we'll be using for the actual deployment. Graham has a lot of those ideas in his head. And I feel like a lot of the work that he has set up for making some of those decisions is kind of like the direction that we may want to try to lean towards. And I don't want to take away from that. And I feel like there's a lot of exploratory issues, or at least items that still need to be discussed and fleshed out as implementation details before we are able to really understand what changes we need to bring to our clusters. So like one of the items we've been kind of discussing the past few weeks is like how to organize our clusters. But I feel like until we determine how we decide to deploy things, I'm not really sure what problem that we would yet be solving. But I would love to hear alternative opinions on that.
One thing that might be worth just sort of factoring in, because I don't know if this changes it or not, but just so you have all the sort of context in case it does, is what orchestration is going to try and do is have things currently deployed via auto deploy and offer, like it will be an option, offer up a way for teams to not necessarily have to be part of auto deploy, and if they want, they can separate away. But that's actually our main focus. So in terms of like how that reaches production, I think like system can certainly fully own that if you want to, right? Like it's not to say like we'll just sit here and wait for you to tell us, but I wonder if there might be it might be worth keeping in mind, I guess, that like a component will come out of either auto deploy or another pipeline, and actually maybe it doesn't matter so much for you. But
Well, this sounds more like a shared goal. Like how we accomplish this is certainly going to involve the SREs trying to figure out
Of
what we
course.
want to accomplish, and that
That's
would be
it.
best. What I'm trying to gain from what we need to work on at this moment in time, or at least think about what we should be working on now, is what leads to being successful with that pipeline. And there's a few items on this epic 779 that I feel like we could concentrate our efforts on while that occurs. And since Graham has all the ideas for that, I feel like he should be leading that direction, and we are participants or contributors to the direction that he is kind of setting forward. Does that make sense? Or is that the wrong thing to be?
I wouldn't assume that too strongly. I would say Graham has got a lot of ideas and has put a lot of suggestions out, but don't be limited by that, right? Like it's certainly not there's nothing that has yet come out of orchestration, particularly around the system thing, where we've said that's absolutely what we want to do. So I know there are lots of ideas, but please don't feel like you have to just wait and be told from Graham.
Okay. So I'll keep that in mind. So maybe this will continue to change, but at the moment, let's maybe discuss some of the other things that I think are important for this entire project to be successful. So I've outlined, the formatting looks a little goofy. Here, I guess I'll share my screen. That way everyone's just staring at the same thing I am. I've poorly outlined a few goals. So like one of the items that I feel like we need in order for development teams to be successful is a mechanism for development teams to see their metrics as knowledge inside of a deployment pipeline. So, metrics and error reporting both provide guidance to a pipeline to determine whether it's safe to move forward in and out of staging or maybe potentially rolling back. Currently, we have a deployment health metric, which I think we need to own. Currently, this is something that's just kind of gathered together, and I don't actually know how deployment health is currently built. This would require a little bit of investigation to the runbooks, but I think exposing that directly to each service team would be quite important. So I think we need to have some ability to query Prometheus in some way, shape, or form as part of a deployment pipeline. And do the same with error reporting. So currently I don't think we've got any sort of mechanism that reaches into Sentry and pulls data in any way, shape, or form. So I think those are two key items that we could probably focus our efforts on and determine how we want to query metrics and errors, and determine how a pipeline might leverage that as providing the knowledge for how a pipeline may operate. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments, or questions about those two line items?
I just have a small comment. So I don't think we have any metrics that that the deployment pipeline checks to determine the health of a deployment, but the delivery dashboard in Grafana does have charts showing the number of Sentry issues for each environment.
Oh, perfect. Okay. That's good. So maybe that's something we could piggyback off of, because I did not realize that. Or maybe I did, I just didn't put those two dots together. So that's interesting. Do you by chance know if we're querying Sentry directly, or do we have some sort of exporter inside of Sentry that's feeding those metrics into Prometheus?
I don't know about that. I can check though.
Okay. So I guess if we want to enable a pipeline in some way, shape, or form to leverage metrics or error reporting, is this something that other people think is the right thing to be working on or contributing towards? Like, does this sound like the right thing to be working on?
I think it sounds like an interest, like certainly like it's going to be super valuable, right? Like it ties in, I'll drop the link in, it ties into a project Quality are currently working on about improving first stage was generating traffic on staging, and it ties into kind of improving the sort of pre-deployment health checks. But I think that possibly is it might be an interesting one to at least consider around this topic. Find a link.
Okay. Okay, so what I will do then is try to spin up an issue where we start the conversation as to how we want to accomplish this. And then maybe we could start trying to figure out whether we need to develop a tool or if there's a tool that we could take advantage of that we have available to us already. I don't know if GitLab itself as a product has some way of looking at metrics that already exist into feeding information into a pipeline. So that'll be something interesting to think about.
Are we talking about pipeline metrics or sort of just general deployment health metrics?
I think realistically, we should be able to talk about any metric at all. It's just a matter of, which metric is important to that service team. We've already got some sort of deployment health metric that's out there. Our production checks utilize this in some fashion, but that metric is also predetermined at the moment. I think it's using the standard apdex and error ratios to determine deployment health. And how that gets put together is a black box to me, at least. I'm sure Andrew could sit here and point you directly to where it comes from. I certainly cannot. But I would imagine service teams are probably going to want to ask questions or maybe add to the list of metrics they may want to provide for themselves. So I think if we could probably start with learning how the deployment health currently works as is, determining what kind of configurability that has, and then maybe also looking into expanding that scope. This may be something deep into the future, but maybe expanding that scope such that if a deployment team has like a specific error or a specific metric that they care about, rather, they could add to a list of deployment service health metrics that may determine what happens with the deployment for their component. Like example, the container registry, we may care only about errors and latency, but they have a huge dependency on GCS, for example. This is a really off-the-cuff example. If GCS is failing, maybe don't deploy, because that's only going to make other things look bad, for example. If GCS is perfectly healthy and everything else is healthy, proceed with the deploy. But if GCS is having a bad day, we probably don't want to kick off a deploy just because that's going to make a rollback occur, and then the rollback is going to look like it failed probably, and that may proceed to cause all kinds of awkward havoc. And I want to make sure that deployment teams have a healthy experience, not a what in the world is going on experience.
Yeah, makes sense. I was thinking eventually, I suppose the teams will be able to sort of make changes to our repositories that hold the rules for Prometheus and Grafana.
Yep.
So like, yeah, I suppose we could make tooling that eases that, makes it easier to add stuff to deployment health checks. Yeah.
Precisely. Like right now, I think it's pretty hard coded to apdex and error reporting. I think if we had a feature inside of our runbooks repository that says, hey, these are the metrics that we care about for deployment health, and it's just an array of items that the development teams may care about, something like that would make it super easy for them to contribute towards and easy to roll back if, something isn't working correctly. And maybe we could expand that to make it something that it's something to be monitored, but may not be contributing directly to a pipeline's decisions. I feel like there's a lot of flexibility because it's all JSONet. So if you know JSONet, you know exactly what to do. I don't know JSONet. So, all right. So I'll get some issues spun up for both of those because I'm not really sure what to do with Sentry. I think I'll piggyback off of what Ruben you mentioned earlier and see if that's something that we could leverage or if there's like some future improvements we need to bring into that.
By the way, I just checked that and it looks like it's pulling something from Prometheus.
Interesting. Okay. If you have any links, go ahead, drop that into the agenda, and I'll take a gander later as I start thinking about and creating issues. Amy, you've got some metrics. What's Epic 771?
So that was the quality project. So Nelia has been working on improving kind of, she's working with Andrew, improving kind of staging, monitoring, but this kind of tangentially ties into this. So we now have more traffic on staging, and the next step that she's kind of starting to think about and would love to work with kind of delivery group, doesn't have to be system, but delivery group on, is kind of related to this. So like, how would we bring in health checks around staging deployments, for example? One of the huge questions that we've talked about a lot, but never reached an answer of, is at what point is it safe to halt deployment? Like, we just have no answer for that. So I just put it in here just for now for context, not saying you have to pick it up, but I expect in the next few months, we'll probably figure out where this fits into our roadmap.
Makes sense. I think that's actually a pretty good call out. You know, staging has healthy QA, but like maybe the AppDex has tanked to a certain degree. It would be wise to look into that on staging prior to something reaching production. So I think this is a good thing to keep track of. Yeah,
we've certainly had some incidents that have had exactly that. And actually, when we've gone back and looked at staging, it turns out we can see like the latency increase, or there is some visible thing, but only if you know what to go and look at based on the way that staging alerts and checks right now.
Yeah. All right. So the next item that I wanted to chat a little bit about is how we build images. Currently, things get built inside of CNG. I think the only one that doesn't get, well, actually, I think everything gets built inside of CNG, right? Pretty sure it does.
It probably does, yeah.
But what the one I was considering was the container registry.
That one definitely does, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we're all on the same page here. Okay. So CNG builds everything. And this is kind of, we need to figure out what we want to do if a component wants to deploy by themselves. You know, right now it's expected that auto deploy is going to come around, do a tag. That tag is going to contain the updated version for all of the repositories and associated with those components. Some may be a tag, such as k8s, I think uses tags, where I think other components like GitLab Pages uses, actually I don't know if Pages uses a SHA, but I think one or two of them uses a SHA. So CNG knows what to build. The problem, though, is that we don't really need to build everything each time a component wants to deploy. You know, there's no reason to build GitLab Rails and Workhorse and Gitly and Shell if the container registry is the component that wants to perform a deploy. So I think we need to have a think about what we need to do with CNG, whether that's implement changes to CNG such that it could build just a component and nothing else. Maybe we pull the work out of CNG, or maybe we duplicate it so that way it's not just in CNG, but maybe closer towards the repository where the developers work in. Something to that effect. I'm not sure how to approach this yet. I think I just need an issue to kind of spin up a conversation, because I think we'll definitely want distribution involved in some of this decision making, probably. Because there are a lot of shared components. Like, for example, GitLab Shell does have a dependency on something upstream in CNG's pipeline that's required for it to build properly. So things like that, we need to make sure that we are ahead of the game on, so that way we understand what we need to do when it comes time to building images for deployment teams.
And there's so many comments like talking about, like, how do you not have a little?
Does anyone have any comments or questions about this particular line item? Sorry if my wife is loud.
Yeah, I think this will be a super interesting one, Mike. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I mean, this one almost feels like we should certainly put together a proposal, but it could be one that's well suited for a POC, like a few days or something. Like I don't, let's not get too caught up. If we can't think it through end to end, we could, it might be a good one to just set up some hands-on, see what happens type of issues.
Okay. So I could certainly get an issue started. That way we could track having that conversation and putting together a POC. So these are the few things that I've thought about so far that I think are the most important that we should start working on. I know it's very loosely defined at the moment. I'm kind of curious as to what other items other people have that I do not have noted here.
Change their face. I don't think they did it right. So I probably got the wrong opinion, but yeah, I think so.
Looking at it from a slightly different angle, if a stage group were to remain inside auto deploys, either from their choice or our choice based on how things play out, are there any things that we could do around this sort of epic that would actually help either us as release managers or also ideally the stage group?
So thinking about this on the surface, right now our production checks are very minimal. We just do a very generic deploy. Is production healthy via the deployment health metric, right? If we make improvements to a specific component, perhaps we could modify auto deploy to make better decisions for certain regards, especially when it comes to rolling back. If things go unhealthy while Giddily is deploying, we might ask Giddily, hey, stop deploying. That way not all the servers get an upgrade, for example. And the same could be said for Prefect as well as Kubernetes too. And error reporting for that matter. I think both error reporting and metrics both have the same goal. Query something, tell us if we're still healthy or not. Let's make a decision inside of our pipeline to proceed forward, pause, stop, roll back, etc. I feel like we could take what we learn inside of these issues and maybe apply this to our auto deploy pipeline, potentially. It would probably be more generic because it's not targeting a component versus targeting the entire auto deploy set of packages, which is nearly everything. But as things get pulled out of auto deploy, we could take those same metrics and apply it specific for a component deploy. I don't think image building would change much, except for maybe just pulling things out if things decide not to be auto deployed as part of our current release coordinated pipeline.
Oh, Garfield.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one about the kind of health checks, because I mean, certainly from the sounds of it, it sounds like something that will give us good value on our current setup, as well as helping us for whatever maybe comes next.
Yeah. Okay.
Something I don't know an answer to, but it might be worth just thinking about, or somebody kind of maybe going and doing a little bit of digging, is whether there's more that we could do even today to link our deployments to error budgets. So I'm fairly sure that when we deploy something, we have a decent chance of affecting the error budgets, or like we're putting out changes. But I don't think we've ever really looked at the two together and actually just asked, is there anything else we can do to help on getting things into the error budgets?
I think that'll be interesting. Go ahead, Ruben.
I was just going to ask what goes into the error budget currently.
Well, that's a great question. As far as I know right now, I think it's largely incidents, but I'm actually not totally sure.
Sorry, John, what were you saying?
I was effectively thinking about the same question you had. I don't think air budgets is very mature at the moment. I think that's like a work in progress from what I understand with the scalability team and what they're working on. So this would probably be a good time for us to maybe work with them and try to figure out how or what we can leverage today.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. Yeah.
Maybe contributing to either what that result ends up looking like, or maybe something we could just query if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing we'll probably have to we'll have to decide on in the future is how we handle like attributing to rollbacks. So we don't really want to penalize people for a rollback which doesn't impact users, right? Because great, like the system worked, users weren't impacted, and we went along. But at the same time, I wonder it's if we had, hopefully we'll never have this case, but if we were to have a team which continually deployed and rolled back like 5 or 6 times a day, it would impact quite a lot of stuff. So we could figure that out a bit later, but I think it's an interesting one to think about. Rollbacks are a great thing in that they save users, but they're also not totally free.
All right. So with all the few items that we discussed, like just to get I just want to get a view into what people think. Like, does everyone think this is the right stuff we need to be working on? Does this excite people? Only one, maybe 2 head nods and a grin. I know it's very exploratory. I think, I don't know. Are there better ways that we should be setting goals so that we understand what we're trying to accomplish that makes it more sane? Or
About that, I was wondering, does it make sense to reframe this as what do we need to do so that we can deploy a component independently before we worry about how different teams can be given control over their own deployments? Or does that
I
not
think
change much?
I think that is probably a better way to put it, because we've got auto deploy today and it works. At some point we want to provide, I guess, I don't want to use the term framework because we're just building a pipeline and we're doing a bunch of other stuff, but I'll keep using the word framework. So if we provide a framework that works, we could hand that framework over to other people. That way, instead of us spending X amount of time getting people into it, it's more like, here's what we have built, start using it and tell us where the problems are, where we are insufficient, so that we can make improvements as necessary. Is that what you're gearing towards, Ruben?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
My thought is that we provide the mechanism for them to deploy with, and we just provide them with how to start using this. So like, say we've got CAS running inside of whatever framework we've provided. At some point, if it's working properly, we could just tell the container registry team, for example, go, here's the documentation for how to use this thing. And then they could just create the necessary merge requests. We don't have to be the shepherds at that point. We just provided a system and they start consuming it as they see fit.
I think I was one step before that. So
Okay.
before trying to build a framework that allows, say, container registry to do a deployment without involving us, suppose I want to do, as a release manager, I want to deploy just Gitly. What do we need to do to make that happen? But I don't know
Gotcha.
if,
Okay.
yeah, I was wondering if it changes anything for us, if we make that the goal.
I think Gitly is a special use case because it's one thing that's not in Kubernetes, for one. And it's got its own specialty scenario in terms of both deployments and rollbacks, for that matter. My hope is that what we do inside of this epic can still contribute towards enabling such, but like deep dark into the future, Gitaly is always going to be kind of special because it's required to be deployed in a certain way prior to the way that we handle it. With the way that we handle auto deploys today, Gitaly is a special use case. I think if we reach a point where Gitaly can be deployed in isolation, at some point, we're going to need to have something that says this version of Gitaly we know is compatible with this version of GitLab. So something needs to check the compatibility matrix of
But
some
even before we
kind.
go too far
Okay.
down that one, Scuback, like in terms of it just being a component as an example,
Yeah.
I wonder, like, say for example, so the first one we hope to move over will be the GitLab agent service. If, for example, we did follow that one, Ruben, and actually, like, is there, say theoretically, GitLab agent service existed, right? We'll say within auto deploys, it'd be better, I guess, if it was in, but in a release manager triggers a deployment world, would that give you a way of actually testing out the sort of like where this lands? Because that's, I guess that's the big question, right? Like, does that actually help you get prepared more closely for self-serve before we actually hand over to teams?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if I understood your first question, but I was thinking right now, did Graham say right now k8s is deployed as part of the, yeah, it is, right? So right now k8s is deployed as part of the regular auto deployments
Or it will be
schedule.
soon. We actually, that's
Oh.
the orchestration goal. So at the moment, it's not at all. Like, well, it's very manual. So our first goal is to get it inside auto deploys so that it gets a lot of the auto version management.
Okay, so assuming we've done that, I suppose we could start building a pipeline that allows us to deploy just k8s while not touching the current coordinator pipeline. So I suppose that would allow us to test what is required to deploy a component in isolation. I think that was your first question, right?
Yeah. So you're definitely not the first person. I give you the same answer, which is one of the things we lose by doing this quarter is we lose the collaboration. So unfortunately, Configure are not ready. Like, ideally, we'd pair up with Configure and just try it out. So it is a little bit like we certainly could do it. I don't want us to be blocked on that. I guess I wonder if we get to a point where, do you think, where both teams actually, that's the thing we need to see happen, and you can figure out namespacing and permissions and health checks and things, and orchestration can work out like all of the kind of complexities on our side around that, what this might look like? Does it feel like actually until we get hands-on, we can't really answer these things?
I think this is where I struggle a little bit because I feel like in order for us to really know how to plug some of the stuff into what a pipeline may look like, we kind of need to understand some of those decisions. And I think that's internally what I'm struggling with. I'm not really sure how to answer some questions at the moment. Like, we could sit here and do all kinds of work to be like, oh, well, we're going to query Prometheus using this simple bash script, but that may not be the right choice or the right move depending on what kind of pipeline we're building. Same for error reporting.
So a lot of it is up to us, right? Like, so I know a lot of it will be kind of like what technically works, but we also have a lot of control over what we want it to look like. I wonder if for now we think about this more around the auto deploys, which I think is kind of where orchestration will also be kind of focusing. So make some improvements for GitLab agent service and pages is kind of what we're focusing on. I think that sounds like from what we've been talking through, there's some really big opportunities around health checks and metrics. We will need to know more about those for any deployment, regardless if it's auto deploy or self-serve. So I wonder if the the framing for your OKR is a little bit more around like preparing, but the kind of the learning comes from make it better on auto deploy, and then we pull out a kind of a slightly more generic piece from there.
I think that makes sense. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll try to, when Michele comes back, obviously, I'll work with him to reframe the OKR. Because I think Ruben brings a good point that you just clarified that, this is really geared towards preparing us, not really, we're not creating the system just yet. These are items that contribute to that system, right?
That's
and
right.
then I'll also start getting issues on the board with at least either starting the discussion, or I think for like a few of these, like error reporting and metrics, I feel like we've got enough information where we could start an investigation into, how to query and what to query, or what improvements we need to make to runbooks to enable such. Error reporting will be a little bit more of a black box, because I feel like we need to learn how to query Sentry probably, or like Ruben said, there's probably some metric that we could already leverage. But so I'll get some issues ready on the board that we could start pulling. And then maybe next week we could either roll through those issues, or maybe start demoing stuff if people have been, so interested, they pull the work and they're successful already. I
So
think that'd be pretty fun.
just to understand, thank you for putting all of this, Skarbek, but like this is gonna be adapted to be part of our OKRs, correct? Or this is outside of the OKRs, or
This is directly contributing towards the OKR is stated around like cluster organization. I think that OKR needs to be reframed as creating a mechanism, or preparing ourselves for creating a mechanism that enables self-serve. Does that sound right, Amy?
So sorry, which issue did you mention, Ahmad? The cluster rebuild one.
yep.
So that's the other OKR, right? You have two OKRs.
We have to I think we have the namespace separation and the cluster.
This is the one that we're talking about, is the namespace separation currently. I think
Oh,
that
it's not
one's
part
the one
of
that we kind of
rebuild
need to reframe.
all production clusters within a week.
Yeah, that's the other OKR.
Is that issue not related though? I assumed it was just a pre-step for the building rebuild.
I feel like being able to rebuild clusters provides us a number of beneficial wins in the future.
Oh, super important. Yeah, no. I'm more questioning this issue that Ahmad's working on. Like, I assumed it was related to the rebuild all production clusters within a week. OKR.
I didn't want to confuse anybody. I was just asking about, we have like the cluster recreation and the namespace separation, and I was just like asking about the creating deployment system. I know this is also like part of the big picture, and this is just a step forward, like having the reporting and the metrics and the CNG build. But I was just asking if it's part of the OKRs or it's an ad hoc, or like I just didn't know. I don't know how it's related directly to the OKRs.
Awesome, thanks for that. So only I'm confused. So Skarbek's answer is correct. So yes, related, some refinement to be coming.
Yeah, I think when we started with the language of the OKRs, I don't think we really fully understood the problem that we're trying to solve just yet. I think we had ideas as to what we needed to accomplish, but since we don't yet know precisely how we're going to build out a pipeline and like what technology or what have you to actually perform that deployment mechanism, that needs to be solved first before we, in my opinion, before we try to figure out what we need to do for how services run inside of Kubernetes, which I think is a shared goal between us and the systems orchestration team. Okay.
So
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say that I was thinking exactly this, that while say trying to pull out a component and make an auto deploy pipeline that only deploys that component, doing that would allow us to figure out, what needs to be done. Yeah.
Precisely.
So we certainly can. Let me review that with Michele and whether we want to pair up and actually have like some people pair up on that, because it's certainly a thing that's come up. I guess I don't want us to what I kind of imagined was we would pair up with a developer from the stage group who owns the component, and then work through with them in terms of how their process works and where do they test things and what sort of metrics are they relying on. I mean, we could certainly do it as a very, very basic test of like a component and not worry about the stage group things and have it as a pure throwaway. We could certainly do that, but I think let's just take care to what I want to avoid basically is going into Q4 and us just handing off like, hey, whilst you were all busy on this other thing, we have created you a deployment pipeline. Here you go. Right. I really want the stage groups to be involved with us actually, setting their stuff up so that they feel they have the ownership of it. So as long as we maintain that, then yeah, I'm sure I'm very happy for us to like do a POC and and figure out like if that helps us make other decisions.
Thanks. That helps understand some of the stuff that goes into making this decision. I was thinking, even if we have a pipeline like that, I don't think it'll be easy to just hand over to the stage group, because this is just a hunch, but I think there'll be a lot more stuff which will need to be done in order to hand over like that. Because like right now, the only people who have visibility into pipelines is us. That's just one of the problems.
Yeah.
So in order to hand over, you'll need to find a way to give the stage group visibility while still maintaining, our compatibility with, I forgot the names of the compliance standards. So I don't think we'll be able to just hand over the pipeline if we do this. So I think there will be a stage of collaboration with the stage group, even if we do this.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So does it feel like it would be useful for us to try and figure out like a cross team, so orchestration plus system POC of trying to take a component, doesn't matter which one, a simple component, and get it deployed through to production?
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
so,
that'll
yeah.
be helpful.
Okay.
Which we could do all of this in parallel, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Like maybe this gives you the answers to the stuff beyond the metrics and the health checks and the things we've talked about. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
So, Amy, I do think that's an important aspect. Is this something that you kind of want me to maybe work with Graham a little bit on to try to figure out how we could accomplish that part?
Yes, so let's get an issue stood up, and what I wonder, I mean, let's get an issue stood up and work out what we want to do, because it might be that actually having a back-end engineer and an SRE could be a good combo, depending on what sort of stuff we think might be the problems. Or we can have multiple people, it's fine. But let's get an issue so that we can actually figure out like what that might roughly look like, and we can work out who's best to get involved.
Sounds good. I could work on creating that issue.
Listen. Okay, great stuff. Yeah, great suggestion, Ruben.
Okay.
By the way, sorry, I guess we had time. No, this is not important. I was just going to say that CAS, I think, is deployed by auto deploy, because the CAS version file is there in GitLab, and I think it gets pulled by release tools. The manual part,
the manual bit's the bit pre where they have to like do the MRs and
update
get
the
them
version
approved.
file.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That part's
you're
manual.
right.
All right, so we are at time, but or well past time. But is there anything else that we want to chat quickly about before we end the call?
Could I just ask for a quick admin? People take a quick about admin. So the discussion issue, I mean, I know we didn't use it today, so maybe have a think about whether it's still useful. It's tricky to find because of its labels and being unassigned. So if we could kind of signpost that a little bit easier, so other people can find it, if we still want to use it, that'd be good.
I can certainly do that.
Awesome, thanks for that. And then the other one is I have to do an OKR update today. So would you mind updating your Epic statuses? I'm not sure who is the one with rescoping is fine, because I can put an update on that one, but the other one that you have for the production
cluster
rebuild, yeah,
Yeah.
if we could get an update on that Epic, that would be great.
Yep, certainly will.
Super, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Greatly appreciate it. Have a
Thanks
lovely
very
day.
much.